Hello friends, how are you? I'm Arith Härger, and today I would like to talk to you about a subject a little different from the usual. Some of you would like to know more about me, who I am, something concrete outside the academic world that makes you realize that I'm just a person like you. It's true that I do enjoy my privacy and tend to keep to myself everything concerning my personal life. But I thought that maybe you would appreciate to know a bit of my own person, and perhaps my words may help you to face some fears. So this is a video that might be a little heavy for some, but it's a perspective that may touch that little fragile spot in the back of your brain where the fear of our delicate mortality resides. I'm not here to enhance that fear. I'm here to try to expose my own traumatic childhood so you understand that you are not alone, and that from death we may learn to appreciate life and not the other way around. So let's take a step ahead and talk. Nothing is truly lost. Nothing has an end. The universe and all life is a spiral, and what has come will come again. I've spent much of my childhood in the countryside, among farm animals, trees, rivers, and very much close to the cycle of nature. Like most of us, I grew up in a very frightening religious background, Christianity. My parents were never religious, but my grandparents and great-grandparents were. And I've spent much of my childhood with them in the countryside, in a very remote valley whose population was mainly old people. My grandmother taught me everything there was to know about the Bible, and her approach to religion wasn't a soft one. I was but a child who could barely yet formulate words, and I was already being introduced to the terrible stories of the Bible. God being an oppressive tyrant who sends down to hell all those who behave in whichever way he disapproves. How horrible hell is, and people being tortured for eternity in rivers of blood and fire, Jesus crucified and suffering for our sins and whatnot. All the type of talk you shouldn't probably tell a child that has just come into the world and knows nothing of reality. So this was the way I was introduced to reality, a terrible world of sin and suffering and death. Even the Son of God suffered terribly and was nailed to a cross and stabbed and left to die in terrible anguish. And Christians praise the very symbol of their gods, suffering and pain and death. It's a religion that denies the beauty of the world and is only concerned with death and suffering. So the world for me was that, because I knew no better. Every breath and every step I took was constantly in fear, afraid to displease this tyrant from the sky who would judge my every action and send me down to hell, into total darkness for eternity, to never see those I loved the most ever again. This is where I grew up. Don't be fooled by the green beauty of nature. This place holds dark secrets and terrible pain. All these trees grew up on top of a lot of blood and terrible suffering. And the wind and the singing of birds muffles the screams of agony. But the heavy atmosphere can still be felt. Life for me was nothing but death. The Almighty God, the Creator, the divine entity that supposedly loved us and was kind and benevolent, was a God of death and great suffering. He caused great suffering to those who stepped out of the line, living life, enjoying life was stepping out of the line and breaking the divine law. So to me, there was nothing but sadness, and I grew up depressive, obviously. In the land where I'm standing right now, there was only old people, and they too were dying. I met many old people when I was little and saw them depart. I met the dying, and they smelled of death. And death smells of old things and urine, feces and disease. And the look of those people's eyes were of someone whose heart and mind are filled with fear, agony, pain and depression. Furthermore, this is the countryside, and so I grew up watching the beginning of life in every animal, and suddenly that life being taken away, because, well, that's how nature works. I saw many animals being killed, being hunted down, butchered, blooded, gutted, and the life being snuffed out of their eyes. And the old peoples likewise. I saw them dying, and my grandparents would take me to the graveyard to see the dead, to see some of my ancestors, dead ancestors, and their old bones in little boxes. How could someone end up like that? Just bone and dust. Life, for me, meant nothing. One moment we were alive, and then there was nothing. Nothing at all. Just emptiness in those people's eyes. Just eyes made of glass, completely lifeless, all brightness gone, and the body was just a husk. I could sense their death, and death sensed like nothing, just pure emptiness, a great void, as if nothing had ever existed. The religion I was introduced in matched perfectly the reality I lived in. There was nothing but death. You must understand that I was only a child, and that was the only thing I knew of the world. Simply death, emptiness, and sorrow. I would cry myself to sleep and wake up sad and afraid because I didn't want to die, and I didn't want to see those I loved also dying. But most importantly, I didn't want to be sent into darkness, that endless void of nothingness beyond death, and never see my parents again, because I love them so much, and I just didn't want them to get old and eventually die and never see them again. I couldn't enjoy life because every damned little thing was against God and his fucking rules. I couldn't enjoy life because, what's the point? I was going to die anyway and be thrown into darkness. God, Jesus, and all the rest of them were not my friends or entities that represented goodness. To me, they were awful beings of death, suffering, and sorrow. And people kept praying to these horrible creatures, praising the sign of the cross with a man nailed to it, dying, crying in agony. People chanted those maddening songs at the old church, a decaying building, just like the decaying of life itself. And next to this monstrosity of stone lay the graveyard, with hundreds of dead people, and even the graves of babies, so small and fragile that never had any chance. And the creatures of the forest, wolves, deer, foxes, boars, all hunted down and skinned, and some of them eaten. All the farm animals, cows, pigs, chicken, and so on, all dead. Everything was dying. An entire religion that denied life. So I wasn't able to appreciate life. I wasn't able to have a normal childhood. I wasn't able to look at my surroundings and see the beauty of life, because all I saw was death, and the God I was forced to follow was death itself. My offerings to him were my own fear, my own sorrow, my own anguish. It stuck here in the throat, this agony and fear. It poisoned my heart, tearing my mind asunder. Life was cold and cruel, and there was nothing but constant suffering. Like I said, don't be fooled by my surroundings. Just a few months ago, I've learned that there is one place in the entire world with more suicides per capita, more than Japan, Finland, and Denmark combined. Can you guess where that place is? Of course, I'm standing right in it. The place where I grew up and spent most of my childhood in, and most of my teenage years. An entire region where death is very real and the numbers are very alarming. But I wasn't surprised to learn this. This is the place where most suicides per capita. This explains the stories of this region and the hanged, swinging bodies on the trees of those who could not take it anymore and put an end to their lives. I've met some. This was my childhood, surrounded by death, and not even religion could save me from it. I could not find solace and comfort in religion because the only God I knew represented suffering, cruelty, and death. The Bible was a horror story being told to me over and over again, every day. And the reality I grew up in didn't show me any different. So I started my life from death and had to learn about life from the opposite side. This is what I want to show you. We fear death, and we all have reasons for it. All we know is life. Everything in the waking world is alive, and that's all we know, and we can't quite grasp beyond that. Death to us seems to be the end because we don't know it. We don't live in it. We live in the living world, and the religion most of us grew up in doesn't teach us about death. It only denies it. It doesn't make death part of life, but something apart from it. It's a religion of death, but doesn't introduce us to it. Rather, it only shows us that it's bad. And we know all around us there is death, but nothing explains it to us. It's there, and we are forced to deny it, but it's constantly there bothering us, in the back of our heads, disturbing us. So we grow up fearing death because we know it's there and it's horrible. So we obviously have the tendency to stay away from it and try to deny it as well, because it's bad and it's the equivalent of suffering and anguish. So we spend an entire life avoiding it and fearing it. But by avoiding death, we also avoid life, because one cannot exist without the other. So we can't escape it and we can't accept it, because we were taught to deny its existence. We were taught to fear a God and live according to His will. We were forced to detach ourselves from the natural world, and as such we don't understand the realities in it. We don't understand death, and so we suffer constantly because we were not introduced to the natural cycle of life. We were just kept in the dark, in fear, until we understand that death is part of life, and in death there is also life. Instead of focusing on the beauty of all things and the goodness, maybe we should start to see life from the point of view of death. What I mean is that we focus on life alone, on what is alive, but if we take a look at death, we will find life in there and beauty, and it will be easier for us to appreciate life. You don't properly appreciate life unless you see life where it wasn't supposed to be. Christianity throws us into a world of violence and suffering, into a world of death and emptiness. Christianity is a world-denying view that forces us to stay away from nature and spend life in fear, trying to save our souls. This is the problem, because we live in nature, but our entire mentality is shaped to avoid the very reality we live in. Christianity constantly forces us to abandon and deny life in favor of living a life elsewhere out of this reality, in some place only reachable with death. And so we don't understand the reality of death that is constant in nature, because we were taught to live outside nature, and death simply isn't part of our life. And what we don't understand, we fear. The constant fear of the unknown. Most of us were forced to deny the living soul of the natural world, always worried about some God in some place and having to live life solely to save our souls to be accepted in this place where this cruel God exists. This religion takes away our only opportunity to appreciate life and nature. By knowing nature, we will understand its cycle, and we will understand life and death as one, and we will no longer fear it. Only when we change our consciousness, only when we relearn and reshape our minds to accept the world, can we possibly be happy. Because with the mindset on denying life, you won't find life even when you are in front of it. You may stand in a forest surrounded by birds, the sounds of the wind, a running stream, the sounds of other animals, but you will never truly feel life if you have been taught to deny it. All you will see is death, because by denying life, you also deny death. But death feels more real than life because you grew up thinking it's something negative and terrible, and so it bothers you. We try to deny what hurts, but what hurts will always be there unless we face it and understand it and accept it. With that denial, you stand in ignorance, and ignorance brings fear, and fear creates a very violent person. The moment I reshaped my own mind and started to deny what I've been taught and started to accept the natural world, I began to be happier. It took me years, and I can say with all honesty that I'm 30 and only now I have started to really appreciate life. I was 15 when I took my first step towards paganism. 15 years ago, I began my process of reshaping my mind and a new reality and denying the religion I grew up in. And slowly, very slowly, I have stepped into nature and stopped seeing only death. I could hear the wind speak and the birds singing and life pulsing all around me. And there was death, but no longer an empty void, but just a natural process in the cycle of all things. Death and decay existing to open up the possibility for new life to come forth. The leaves rot and fertilize the ground. The animal dies to give sustenance to a wondrous variety of other beings. And from the carcass, more life sprouts. I knew death, but now I was seeing the other side of it, one that I have never thought about. Death wasn't the end after all, so I have learned to appreciate death and getting to know it better. And from that moment on, I could finally appreciate life. We now stand in a moment in time where all we see is death around us. The world is dying, and we have led many species to extinction. The ocean is collapsing, and there seems no end to this destruction and death. There seems to be no hope. And because we grew up in a background that pushes us further away from the world and constantly speaks of doom and the end of days, we project those ideas into reality, into the reality we live in. So it wasn't just my childhood that was particularly surrounded by death. But right now, there is death everywhere. The death of the world. Many of us live in constant depression because there are no spiritual answers in this horrible religious background most of us grew up in. There is no hiding and no comfort in the spiritual, in something we know it's there, but we can't reach it because we were taught that only with death we can reach the spiritual. The natural order of things is impartial. The cosmos doesn't care about the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives, be that of humans, birds, felines, fish, etc. But is all hope truly lost? It's time for us to leave behind all religious notions we had previously and reshape our collective consciousness and go back to our roots. When we step into the natural world, into reality, if we come with our mind corrupted by the same religion that forced us to deny the living world, we will only find sorrow in the natural world because we are unable to truly understand it, hear it, seeing it and feeling it. But if we step into the natural world with a mind capable of accepting the natural order of things, we will find peace and joy. It is true, nature is as beautiful as it is cruel, and it doesn't care about a particular life. All things die because they must, to give way to more life and rebirth. Every breath in the world, every sound of nature, every drop of blood, and every birth and every death is the spiritual world pulsing and vibrating. Everything is part of this great cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Life is not a linear timeline with a beginning and an end, but rather a circle, a continuous process of life. These are the gods, every spiritual entity that works to maintain the cycle of life. Nothing is above the natural law. No one is above anything. We all stand in the same space, sharing the same reality. And we are all born, live and die to be born again and enjoy life constantly forever. Because we shall return to the spiritual world, which isn't in some place in a reality far away, but in here, right here in this earth, this very soil beneath our feet. We are part of this cycle in life and in death. And we are not going anywhere. We shall simply return to where it all started, to begin anew. Nothing is truly lost. Nothing has an end. The universe and all life is a spiral, and what has come will come again. I think the problem of our suffering doesn't just reside in the terrible religions we have created that pushes us further away from the natural world. I think we have built for ourselves societies that seem too strong and impregnable, so advanced in both technology and social behavior that we have created an illusion of ourselves. We have placed ourselves above everything else, and we have imposed our presence on nature, creating this illusion that we can control it, because we are violent and we just have to destroy and kill to stay high above nature itself. And the image of God and the very stories of the Bible are a reflection of ourselves and our war against the natural world. God is the personification of our cruelty and our lust for power. standing like tyrants, creating our own laws and imposing them upon everyone, forcing it upon nature. And we forgot that we are fragile and we have been destroying the world because our religious mind is one that denies the world. Therefore, we have no respect over life because the aim is to live elsewhere for eternity in a perfect realm of brightness and purity. We are afraid of this fragile existence. We are afraid of our weaknesses. We know we shall die, but refuse to acknowledge it, and so we force ourselves to build and destroy and kill just to feel powerful and above nature, as if our actions would make us live forever. By destroying the natural world and on top of it building great monuments that represent our power over nature, we have created this illusion that we are the true architects of life. It was this illusion that created our fear of death, and the fear of death continues to push us to build more and destroy more to keep our minds away from acknowledging the truth of the natural way of things. We think we are so special and at the center of all life, so why should we die if we are this special and powerful? We die because we are as much part of the natural world as any other creature. We live in terror because we cannot accept the fact that the world continues to exist without us. We live in terror because we can't accept that we are just like everything else in the cycle of nature. We must accept that we are part of the cycle of nature. We must accept the world and the natural order of things. Once we accept that, we will be happier because we shall be in peace with our fate. We shall be in peace with the fact that we must die to live. We must die to return, to be reborn, to embrace the flow of life and let ourselves go in this stream that pulses life and magic. Consciousness continues to exist. It's impossible to destroy it. Consciousness is our very soul. What we call soul is made of both energy and conscious, and that can never be destroyed. Rather, it continues to flow in this never-ending cycle of existence. We aren't above anything, we just are and continue to be. Matter can be destroyed, but not the essence of life. We have been worried about saving our souls, worried about pleasing a God, worried about our actions that can be sinful in the eyes of a judging tyrant. But our true sin is to deny the divinity of the world itself and within our very nature. All life is divine and resides within ourselves. Each one of us contains in our bodies the divine spark, the very essence of the cosmos, that is capable of giving life to matter, giving consciousness. We are all made from the same space dust and cosmic matter that contains consciousness. All matter is destroyed, but not its essence. Matter is destroyed to create new matter and contain another consciousness. When matter is destroyed, it releases energy and essence back into the cosmos to find more matter and a constant cycle of existence. It's this consciousness that is our true selves, and we shall exist always in nature itself. We just shift and flow. We humans are not above anything. We are just part of the same. Every creature contains divinity in itself. Every bird has the same consciousness that was once in a tree, in a bear, in a fish, even in another human being. When we look into another creature's eyes, we see our own reflection. The first time I had contact with paganism, real paganism, was right here when I was 3 years old. But I would only realize that after the age of 15, when a suppressed memory would reveal itself from the depths of my memory. My mind was so tormented by Christianity and the traumas it caused me that I was unable to acknowledge the beautiful things that were happening all around me. I have spent at least 15 years in absolute depression and deep sorrow without realizing that there was beauty and goodness and magic all around me. A memory from back when I was 3 years old came to me late when I was becoming a young adult. In the village there was some early summer celebration, but I paid no mind to that. It's just a village in the middle of a valley, and everything outside it is quite dark during the night. And for some reason, 3-year-old me left from this celebration in the middle of the village square, and I stepped into the night, into the woods. There are swamps and streams all around, wolves and wild boar, but I was only a child and without any perception of the dangers of the natural world. In darkness, in the middle of the woods, just outside the village, I saw in the distance a great bonfire. I walked towards it without a care in the world. There were people celebrating in their own manner the early summer celebrations, remnants of paganism still alive. The only people that seemed to be truly happy in this shithole, probably because they kept the old ways and accepted life. All I remember were shadows of people dancing around the flames frenetically, and some words and shouts and singing. Shadows of people and of animals. I cannot see beyond that, and I cannot hear the sounds of the people. I just know there was some rhythmic chanting, but I can hear the wolves. The wolves were running nearby and howling, and the dogs of the village were barking, of course. And then the memory ends here, but this memory completely stayed hidden with so much sorrow and depression and anguish until it returned at last when I started the process of abandoning that oppressive religious line of thought. And I felt so alive with that memory, such magic pulsing. I was 3 years old. I don't even know if it was real, but it's in my head, and when that memory came to me again, it marked the beginning of a new time for me. Finally starting the process of accepting the world and praising life through death. I won't deny that the traumatic past is still very much alive in me, but I keep pushing it back every day, and I try to see death for what it is, what it truly is, simply a natural part of life, just a path we all must take to reborn from the ashes. I think that's what being a pagan truly is, to have a world-accepting view, accepting the spirit of the world itself, accepting divinity in all living things, denying a dualistic conception of humanity and the cosmos, of good and evil, life and death, and accepting the cycle of life which will lead to the liberation of the self. This is the nature of humanity's relationship with the divinity of this world, seeing ourselves as just another element in the creative pattern of the divine, which is reflected upon nature. For many centuries we have been cut off from our intimate relationship with the natural world and the cosmos. We were forced to abandon the animistic notions that everything contains a soul, a consciousness, which led us to believe that the world is deprived of beauty and meaning. We have been taught that this world never truly lived, and as such it's lifeless, so why have respect for a dead thing? We saw death and we were unable to understand it because we saw in it the same emptiness we believed existed in the world, or rather, the emptiness oppressive religions created and implemented in our fragile minds. We have denied the soul of the world. We have made ourselves blind to the only thing that makes life worth living. It's time to move past that. It's time to free ourselves from the traumatic experience that countless generations have suffered from and return to our roots, return to the acceptance of nature, the acceptance of life and everything that comes with it. It's time to reconnect with the living soul of the world, the endless web of spiritual entities that comprise life. And we shall again understand our place in life, our purpose, our existence, and we shall no longer fear death. Countless have suffered and many have put an end to that suffering. These hills still sing those dreadful songs. The despair, anguish, sorrow and depression of humanity that we are all aware nowadays is the product of centuries of denial of the spiritual life of the world and the desperate urge to regain contact with that spiritual life, but we just don't know where to start. This suffering is our fault because we have traded the old gods for the demonic entities of the new world. A world of pure materialism, industrialization, technology above the natural elements that compose life itself. We have put aside the respect we once had for the living world because we have been taught that this world is lifeless and there is no soul in it. We have abandoned the old gods and replaced them with a divine tyrant that perfectly represents our greediness and lust for power and eagerness to be above all things in this hierarchical illusion where we reign supreme. To save this world from its destruction caused by ourselves, it's not only about forcibly changing our actions. First, we must change our collective consciousness and accept the living soul of the world. As soon as we acknowledge that the world is a living entity, we shall respect it and we won't have to forcibly change our actions because we will gladly change them gradually out of respect and love and not out of fear and to save ourselves from doom and death. Death is there no matter what, but you can accept it as a natural part of the cycle of all things. Just another step in the flowing spiral composed by the spiritual entities of this world and the cosmos. Destroying the world is destroying your chances of rebirth. Our tyrannical religious ideas started a war with this world and with the gods themselves and gave us death, the biggest single thing we fear the most. We brought death, the wrong death. We must accept the natural death and reintroduce it in the world and in our lives. We must acknowledge it as a necessity that contributes to life and as a force that maintains our connection with the spiritual world, so we may be part of it and live again. And so we praise life through death. Never forget, nothing is truly lost. Nothing has an end. The universe and all life is a spiral, and what has come will come again. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was useful. I hope my words weren't too heavy. I don't mean to cause any more fear or to enhance the already existing fear and depression. I just want you to understand that we really should embrace our roots, our cultural heritage of the past, and stop this religious oppression we have been living in most of our lives. It's time to change our collective consciousness. Once again, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag. Still